When billionaire James Anderson caught his maid's daughter teaching his son a strange, secret language, he thought it was mischief, until the truth shattered everything he believed. In a mansion built on silence, power had no voice until a sound broke through. A faint tapping, steady, rhythmic, defiant, echoing through the marble halls of a billionaire's empire. For James Anderson, control was everything. But you can't control what you don't understand. Behind that sound was his son, and a girl who wasn't supposed to matter. A maid's daughter, teaching the heir of an empire a language long forgotten, and a truth his father had buried. Because sometimes, what seems like rebellion is a cry for help. And sometimes, the smallest code can unlock the loudest secret. This isn't just a story about wealth and power. It's the story of how one sound shattered both and changed everything that came after. And before I forget, where are you watching from today? Leave a comment below. Enjoy the story. A strange, rhythmic tapping echoed through the billionaire's silent home. James Anderson was a man who controlled everything, but he could not control this sound. It was not music, and it was coming from the one place he felt he had no control at all, his son's wing of the house. James loosened his silk tie. He had just returned from a 12-hour negotiation in Chicago. The deal would make him another $100 million. It should have made him happy, but the victory felt hollow. The tapping sound was faint, but it irritated him. A persistent, patterned sound. His 17-year-old son, Matthew, was supposed to be studying. James walked across the cold marble floor of the entryway. The house was a masterpiece of glass and stone, overlooking the city lights. But it was not a home. It was a statement. The staff had already gone for the evening, except for his maid, Emily Hayes. She was likely in the kitchen, preparing for the next day. The sound grew slightly louder as he approached the west wing. It was a stubborn, precise sound. James felt a familiar knot of anger tighten in his stomach. Matthew was failing. Not just one class, but 3. His tutors were all baffled. They said Matthew was bright, but he was profoundly disengaged. James had given his son everything. The best schools, a car worth more than a small house, a future that was guaranteed. And in return, Matthew gave him silence, bad grades, and a sullen look that bordered on hatred. James had a board meeting in Tokyo tomorrow. He did not have time for this. He expected to find Matthew in his bedroom, staring at a phone or a computer. But the sound was not coming from Matthew's room. It was coming from the old study. James paused. No one used the study. It was a dark room, filled with his own father's old books. James pushed the heavy oak door open without knocking. The scene inside stopped him cold. His son, Matthew, was not at the desk. He was sitting on the floor. His long legs were crossed, and his back was against an old leather armchair. And in front of him, sitting on a small footstool, was a 12-year-old girl. James recognized her immediately. Sophie Hayes, the maid's daughter. A wisp of a girl with bright blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was supposed to be in the kitchen with her mother, Emily, doing her homework. They were not talking. They were staring at each other intently. Sophie held a small, polished wooden ruler. With a pencil, she was tapping a rapid, complex pattern against the leg of the footstool. Matthew held a legal pad on his knee. He was not looking at the girl. He was listening, his head bowed. He scribbled furiously on the pad. He finished writing, then tapped his own pencil, much more slowly, on the cover of his notebook. Sophie listened, nodded, and then began tapping her faster, more confident rhythm. "What is this?" James asked. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence like a knife. Matthew jumped, his head snapping up. The legal pad slipped from his knee and clattered to the floor. When he saw his father, his face flooded with a dark, familiar red. It was not guilt. It was rage. "Get out," Matthew hissed. Sophie Hayes did not jump. She simply stopped tapping. She turned her head and looked at James. Her eyes were clear and calm. There was no fear in them. It was the same look she gave him when she passed him in the hall, a look of simple, polite acknowledgement. It unnerved him. "I asked a question," James said, his voice dangerously low. He stepped into the room. "It is 6 o'clock. You are failing trigonometry. Your SAT exams are in 3 months. And you are in here, playing games with the maid's daughter?" The words were meant to sting Matthew, but they also stung the girl. James did not care. He saw the legal pad on the floor. He gestured to it. "It's not a game," Matthew said, scrambling to his feet. He was tall, like his father, but he slouched. He always slouched. as if the weight of his own life was too much to carry. Then what is it? James challenged. A new way to waste your time? You've already mastered all the old ones. It's none of your business. Matthew shouted. When your grades are so low that Northwood Prep calls me personally, James said, stepping closer. Everything you do is my business. You are an Anderson. You will not embarrass me. It's not embarrassing. Matthew gestured wildly at the girl, who still sat quietly on the stool. It's Morse code. James stared. Morse code? Like in old war movies? That's what you're doing. It's a language, Dad. Not just sounds. It's a dead language. It is useless, James said flatly. He looked past his son to the girl. She was watching him, her hands folded in her lap. And you, he said to Sophie, you should be with your mother. Not distracting my son. I'm not distracting him, Sophie said. Her voice was soft, but clear. It did not tremble. I am teaching him. James almost laughed. The absurdity was overwhelming. Teaching him? A 12-year-old girl is teaching him? What could you possibly teach him that his $500 an hour tutors cannot? She's teaching me something that matters. Matthew shouted, stepping between his father and the girl. Which is more than you ever did. You just throw money at me and expect me to be you. I expect you to be a success. James retorted. Not a failure who plays secret games in the dark. The two of them stood inches apart. The father, a fortress of power and tailored suits. The son, a collapsing frame of expensive clothes and raw anger. I hate you, Matthew whispered. The words were quiet, but they hit James harder than any shout. Matthew shoved past him, slamming his shoulder into James's chest. He ran out of the room. James heard his heavy footsteps pounding down the hall, followed by the slam of his bedroom door. The study was silent again, except for the hum of the air conditioning. James was left alone with the maid's daughter. He was shaking, not just from anger, but from the word hate. He looked at the girl. She had not moved. She was the calm center of the storm. What did you do to him? James asked, his voice low. He felt a sudden, sharp suspicion. What was this about? Was the girl's mother, Emily, behind this? Was this some play for money? I didn't do anything, Mr. Anderson, Sophie said. She stood up from the stool. She was small for her age. He has changed, James said, thinking aloud. He is worse than ever. He is failing. He is defiant. And now he is learning this nonsense from you. It isn't nonsense, Sophie replied. What is it then? James bent down and picked up the legal pad from the floor. He looked at the page. It was covered in neat columns. On one side, letters of the alphabet. On the other, patterns of dots and dashes. Below that, Matthew had been practicing, writing out words and their corresponding code. James saw the last line Matthew had written. Do not forget. James read aloud, his voice sharp with suspicion. What is this? What are you planning? We are not planning anything, sir, Sophie said calmly. Then why this? Why Morse code? The girl looked at the pencil and ruler in her hand, then back at James. My great-grandfather was a soldier, she said quietly. A legendary war veteran. He said this code saved his life. He said most people look, but they don't see. Most people listen, but they don't hear. She looked James directly in the eye. He said you have to listen for the things hidden under the noise. James felt a strange chill. Her words echoed the things his own father used to say. But this was a child of his maid. He was a billionaire who commanded boardrooms. He would not be lectured by a 12-year-old. You are done teaching my son, James said. The words were final. You will go to the kitchen. You will tell your mother that if I ever find you alone with Matthew again, she will be fired. Do you understand me? Sophie's calm expression finally broke. A flicker of fear crossed her face. Not for herself. For her mother. She nodded. Yes, sir. Go. She walked quickly out of the room, leaving James alone in the dark study. He stood there for a long time, the legal pad still in his hand. He looked at the dots and dashes. It was a language he could not read. A secret in his own house. He thought his son was the problem. He thought the girl was a distraction. He was wrong. The tapping was just the beginning. And the truth it would reveal would leave him utterly speechless. James stood in the silence of the study, the heavy legal pad in his hand. The room smelled of old leather and paper. He ran his thumb over the page. Dots and dashes. A language he did not understand, being taught in his own home, under his own roof. He was a man who understood markets. He understood leverage, risk, and return on investment. He could look at a spreadsheet and see the future of a company. He looked at this page and saw nothing but a jumble of marks. Do not forget. It felt like a threat, or a warning. He looked around the room. His father had spent his last years in this study. James rarely entered. His father, William Anderson, had been a different kind of man. He had built the original company, yes, but he had been softer. He had served in the military. He had read books on philosophy and history. James had always seen this as a weakness, a lack of focus. James had tripled the company's value by being focused. He had no time for old books or dead languages. He said you have to listen for the things hidden under the noise. The girl's words were bold. They were not the words of a servant's child. They were the words of someone who believed she knew something he did not. He felt the anger return, cold and sharp. He had been dismissed by his son and lectured by a 12-year-old. He tore the sheet of paper from the legal pad, folded it, and put it in the pocket of his suit jacket. Then he walked to the kitchen. The kitchen was on the other side of the mansion. It was a vast, stainless steel room, professional and clean. Emily Hayes was standing at the large central island, wiping down a marble countertop. She was a woman in her late 30s, with the same blonde hair as her daughter, though hers was tied in a tight bun. She was plain, efficient, and almost invisible. James had employed her for 3 years. He realized he had probably never spoken more than 10 words to her at a time. Emily, he said. She stopped wiping. She turned to him, her hands clasped in front of her. Mr. Anderson, do you need something, sir? Your daughter, Sophie. She was in the study with my son. Emily's face did not change, but James saw her hands tighten. A mother's reflex. Sir, she was supposed to be here with you. She finishes her homework, sir. I let her read in the library. She's very quiet. She was not reading, James said. He walked closer. He wanted to see if she was lying. She was with Matthew. They were engaged in some kind of secret game. Emily's brow furrowed. A game, sir? I don't think Sophie plays many games. They were using a code. Morse code. Your daughter was teaching him. At this, Emily's expression shifted. It was not guilt. It was recognition, and something like dread. Ah, she said, her voice dropping. That. So you knew? James said. It was an accusation. I knew she practices it, sir. It was her great-grandfather's. She trailed off, looking down at the counter. Her great-grandfather was a war veteran. She told me. James's voice was impatient. What does that have to do with my son? I don't know, sir. Emily looked back up at him. Her eyes were honest. I truly don't. Matthew, he found her practicing one day. In the garden. She taps on the bench. He asked her about it. And you allowed this to continue? Mr. Anderson, Emily said, and her voice was steady, though very quiet. Your son? He's a lonely boy. My daughter is a quiet girl. I thought they were just talking. I did not think it would be a problem. A lonely boy, James repeated. The words sounded like nonsense. He has tutors. He has a driver. He has access to anything he wants. He doesn't have any friends, sir, Emily said simply. The statement hung in the air. It was a fact. James knew it. The boys Matthew knew were sons of other men like James. They were competitors, not friends. That is not the point, James said, recovering. The point is, my son is failing in school. He is defiant. And I find him learning a useless code from your daughter. It is a distraction. It will stop. Emily nodded, her face pale. Yes, sir. I told Sophie that if I find her alone with him again, you will be dismissed. I am telling you the same thing. He watched her absorb the threat. He saw the slight tremor in her hands. She was a single mother. She needed this job. He knew it, and she knew he knew it. This was leverage. This was a language he understood. I understand, Mr. Anderson. It will not happen again, she said. Good. He turned to leave. Sir. He stopped and looked back. It isn't useless, Emily said. She was looking at the floor. The code. It isn't useless. It is to me, and it is to my son's future. My grandfather, Sophie's great-grandfather. He was a prisoner of war. For 2 years. He was in a cell, alone. The man in the next cell, he was an officer. They never saw each other. But they used the code. They tapped on the wall. Just dots and dashes. James was silent. It's how they stayed alive, Emily said, her voice thick with an old, inherited pain. It's how they told each other to be strong. It's how they knew they were not alone. To my family, it is not a game. It is a promise. That you can be in the darkest place, and you can still find a way to speak. And someone will hear you. James looked at the woman. She had never spoken this much to him in 3 years. He had wanted to intimidate her. He had succeeded. But she had also, in her quiet way, shamed him. He left the kitchen without another word. He walked past the grand staircase and down the hall toward his own office. He heard a door close. He glanced back. Sophie was walking out of a small pantry, holding a cloth. She must have been inside, listening to the entire conversation. She looked at him. He expected to see tears or anger. He saw nothing but that same, unnerving, quiet gaze. She knew her mother's job was on the line. She knew he was the one holding the blade. And she just looked at him, as if he were a puzzle she was trying to solve. Then she walked over to her mother in the kitchen. James went into his office and shut the door. He sat at his desk, a single, massive piece of polished obsidian. His flight to Tokyo was in 8 hours. He had a video call with the board in 20 minutes. He opened his laptop. He saw the quarterly projections. He saw the market analysis. But in his mind, he saw his son's face, twisted with hatred. I hate you. He saw the legal pad. Do not forget. And he heard the maid's story. It's how they knew they were not alone. James felt a sudden, strange, and deeply unpleasant emotion. It was a cold spike of doubt. He looked at the bookshelf across the room. It was filled with his own books. Business strategy, biographies of other billionaires, economics. But on the bottom shelf, dusty and untouched, were his father's books. Old, leather-bound volumes. History, poetry, and a thin, dark blue book. The official Signal Corps Manual. 1943. James stared at it. He had not seen that book in 30 years. His own father, William Anderson. He had been a signalman in the war. James had forgotten. He had actively, purposefully, forgotten. He canceled his board meeting. He told his pilot to delay the flight to Tokyo. He walked to the bookshelf, pulled the dusty book from the shelf, and sat back down at his desk. He opened it. The first page was a chart. A dot dash, B dash dot dot dot, C dash dot dash dot. He pulled the folded paper from his pocket. He spread it out on his desk, next to the keyboard. He began to translate. He looked at the folded paper, then at the open manual. The official Signal Corps Manual. 1943. His father's book. James had not just forgotten his father was a signalman. He had buried the memory. It did not fit the narrative. James Anderson, the billionaire, was self-made. He had taken his father's modest company and forged an empire. His father, William, was the past. A softer, weaker time. James looked at the legal pad paper again. He smoothed it out. At the top of the page, Matthew had practiced the alphabet, his handwriting sloppy but determined. Below the alphabet were practice words. James saw SOS. 3 dots, 3 dashes, 3 dots. He saw help. A chill ran up his spine. This was not a game. It was a plea. Then he looked at the last line, the one he had overheard. He ran his finger along the page, translating letter by letter. Do not forget. Forget what? He thought back to the conversation in the study. Sophie's words. My great-grandfather was a soldier. A legendary war veteran. He said this code saved his life. He thought of Emily's words in the kitchen. He was a prisoner of war. For 2 years. It's how they knew they were not alone. James felt a deep, unfamiliar discomfort. He was a man of action. When a problem arose, he fixed it. He cut the limb. He bought the competitor. He signed the check. This was a fog. It was an emotion. He looked at the word help, written in his son's hand. He felt a spike of anger. The girl. This Sophie Hayes. She was filling his son's head with this melodrama, this history, this weakness. She was the problem. The connection had to be severed. Cleanly and completely. He closed the manual. He would not show his son that he had translated the code. That would be admitting it had value. He would solve this the way he solved everything. With authority. In his room, Matthew was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling. His room was a catalog of expensive objects. A virtual reality headset, still in its box. A high-end gaming computer, its screen dark. A collection of guitars he never learned to play. Each one was a monument to his father's attempts to purchase a personality for him. He felt the rage burning in his chest. It was a familiar fire. But underneath it was a cold, desolate emptiness. When he was in the study with Sophie, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was full. He was learning something. Something real. Something that connected him to something. A history. A person. His father had burst in and shattered it. He had insulted Sophie. He had called Matthew a failure. Matthew got up and walked to his window. His room was in the west wing. It overlooked the vast, dark gardens. Far across the lawn, he could see the warm lights of the kitchen. He knew Sophie and her mother were in there. He pictured Sophie's face. That calm, quiet intelligence. She had been afraid. Not of him, but of his father. Because of him. He picked up his phone. The screen lit up, showing a dozen unread texts from people he barely knew. He had no one to talk to. He threw the phone onto the bed. He clenched his fist. He thought about the code. He went to the window and pressed his finger against the cold glass. He tapped out a slow, desperate rhythm. 3 short taps. 3 long taps. 3 short taps. SOS. It was a silent message, sent into the darkness. He knew no one could hear it. He knew no one was listening. In the kitchen, the silence was heavy. Sophie was sweeping the floor, her small hands tied on the broom. Emily was polishing a set of silver goblets, her movements quick and angry. The metal clinked against the marble counter. You heard him, Emily said. Her back was to her daughter. Yes, Mama. You will not go near Matthew again. You will stay in this kitchen, or you will stay in our apartment above the garage. Nowhere else. Do you understand me? He'll fire you, Sophie said. It was not a question. It was a fact. He will, Emily said, stopping her work. And we have nowhere to go. This job, this is everything, Sophie. This is your school. This is our home. It's not fair, Sophie said, her voice small. Matthew. He just wanted to learn. He's sad. Fair doesn't matter to men like Mr. Anderson, Emily said bitterly. Power matters. He has it. We do not. We are the help, Sophie. You must never forget that. Great-grandpa was just help, wasn't he? Sophie asked, leaning on the broom. He was just a private. But he was smarter than the officers. He knew the code. And he ended up a prisoner of war. Emily snapped, turning around. Her face was harsh. He survived, yes. But he came back broken. This is not a storybook, Sophie. This is our life. You will obey Mr. Anderson. He wasn't broken, Sophie whispered after her mother had turned back to the silver. He was just quiet. James left his office. He felt resolved. He had a new plan. He would reassert control. He walked down the hall to Matthew's room. He did not knock. He pushed the door open. Matthew was still standing by the window. He turned, his face a mask of hostility. What do you want now? We are going to fix this, James said. His voice was the one he used in the boardroom. Decisive. Final. Fix what? Fix me. Matthew laughed, a short, harsh sound. You've been trying to fix me for 17 years. Your grades. Your attitude. This, melancholy, James said, waving his hand dismissively. I am canceling my Tokyo trip. Matthew's head snapped up. He looked genuinely surprised. What? I am staying here. We are going to find you a new school. A better one. A new school? I'm halfway through my junior year. This one clearly isn't working, James said, walking into the room. I'll call the board at Northwood. We'll find a place. A wilderness program. A boot camp. Something to build character. A boot camp. Matthew's voice cracked with disbelief. You want to send me to a boot camp? Because I was learning Morse code. Because you are failing, James shouted, his composure finally breaking. Because you look at me with contempt. Because you spend your time with the staff instead of preparing for your future. You are an Anderson. You will start acting like one. And what is that? Matthew challenged, stepping closer. He was almost as tall as his father now. A cold, empty man who buys and sells everything? A man who threatens a single mother over nothing. James froze. What did you say? I heard, Matthew said, his voice dropping to a low, shaking rumble. I want to find Sophie. To apologize for you. I heard you in the kitchen. You threatened to fire Emily. James's face hardened. That is a private matter between me and my employee. No, that's because of me. Matthew shoved his father's shoulder. You bully everyone, don't you? You bully your board, you bully your staff, and you bully me. And now you're bullying a 12-year-old girl. That girl, James said, pointing a finger, is a distraction. I have forbidden her from seeing you. Her mother understands the situation. You didn't forbid her, Matthew said, his voice shaking with rage. You threatened her. You threatened their home. I did what was necessary. You're a coward, Matthew whispered. James slapped him. The sound echoed in the huge, sterile room. It was sharp and final. Matthew did not cry out. He did not flinch. He just stood there, touching his cheek. A red mark was already rising on his pale skin. He He looked at his father. The anger in his eyes was gone. It had been replaced by something worse. A cold, dead certainty. "You will never, ever understand," Matthew said quietly. He walked past his father, out of the room. "Matthew, where are you going?" James yelled, moving after him. Matthew didn't answer. He ran down the hall, taking the grand staircase 2 steps at a time. "Matthew, stop. The gates are locked," James bellowed, following him. James reached the massive front door. It was standing open. He looked out into the night. He saw Matthew disappear around the side of the house, heading for the service path that led to the gardens and the garage. James stopped in the doorway. He was breathing hard. His hand was stinging. He had just hit his son. He hadn't done that since Matthew was a small child. He looked at his hand. The hand that signed billion-dollar deals. The hand that crushed competitors. He had lost. In his own home, he had lost all control. The night was cold. He heard the wind in the trees. And then he heard another sound. A faint, rhythmic tapping. It was not a pencil. It was metal on metal. It was coming from the direction of the garage. James felt a cold dread. He ran out the door, across the lawn, into the night. James ran, his expensive leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft, perfectly manicured grass. The night air was cold. It cut at his face. He felt the sting of his own hand, the echo of the slap. He felt the blood pounding in his temples. He was a man who solved problems. He was running toward a problem, and he would solve it with fire. The sound got louder as he neared the large, detached garage. It was a structure that looked more like a modern art gallery than a place to park cars. Above it was a modest 2-bedroom apartment for the senior staff. For Emily and her daughter. The tapping was sharp. Clack, 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 clack. It was metal on metal. James rounded the corner of the building. And he saw him. Matthew was not in the garage. He was standing on the gravel path beside it. He had picked up a small, heavy wrench from a nearby gardening cart. He was standing directly below the apartment window, reaching up and tapping the code onto the metal drain pipe that ran up the side of the wall. He was communicating with the girl, directly defying him. "Matthew!" James roared. His voice echoed off the stone wall. Matthew stopped tapping. He turned, his face pale in the light from the house. He held the wrench in his hand, gripping it like a weapon. "Go away," Matthew said. His voice was low and shaking. "You put that down. You are coming back to the house. Right now." James advanced on him. "No. I am not going to tell you again, Matthew. This ends now. You are done with this fantasy. You are done with that girl." A light flicked on in the apartment above them. A window slid open. "Matthew!" Sophie's small voice called down. She leaned out the window, her blonde hair catching the light. She looked small and frightened. "Sophie, go inside. Lock your door." Matthew shouted up at her. "Sophie, get your mother," James commanded. The girl disappeared from the window. "You see what you've done?" James said, jabbing a finger at his son. "You've brought this chaos into my home. You've dragged these people into it." "I brought this." Matthew laughed, a truly broken sound. "You did this. You couldn't stand it. You couldn't stand that I had one thing. One single thing in my life that wasn't from you. One thing that mattered." "Mattered?" "A child's game." "It's not a game," Matthew screamed, his voice cracking. It's about not being alone. Something you would never understand." He was echoing the maid's words. James felt a flash of pure rage. This was an infection. The girl and her mother, they had infected his son with these weak, sentimental ideas. The side door to the garage opened. Emily Hayes ran out, pulling a cardigan around her. She was in her pajamas. Her face was creased with sleep and panic. "Mr. Anderson." "Sir, please. What's happening?" she cried, looking from James to Matthew. "Matthew, what are you doing with that wrench?" "He's defying me, Emily," James said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, cold level. "He is out here, in the middle of the night, communicating with your daughter, after I explicitly forbade it." I didn't know, sir. I was asleep." Emily wrung her hands. Sophie, come down here." Sophie appeared at the door behind her mother. She was wearing a simple white nightgown. She looked tiny against the backdrop of the massive, dark house. "This is what I was talking about, Emily," James said. "This is the distraction. This is the poison. Please, sir," Emily begged. "She won't do it again. I won't let her. Please, Mr. Anderson, don't do this." "What's he doing?" Matthew asked, looking at Emily's terrified face. "What did he do?" "He threatened to fire her, Matthew," James said, his eyes locked on his son. And now, I am going to do it. This is the consequence of your actions. Emily let out a small sob. No, sir, please. I have nowhere. I have a child. You should have thought of that before you allowed your daughter to disrupt my family, James said. She didn't disrupt anything, Matthew shouted. He threw the wrench onto the gravel. It landed with a loud, metallic crunch. I did. I asked her. I begged her to teach me. She's smarter than all your stupid tutors. She's better than any of them. She's better than you. Matthew walked over and stood next to Emily and Sophie, facing his father. He was a boy, but in that moment, he looked like a man, shielding them. They are more of a family to me than you have ever been, Matthew said. The words were quiet, but they cut through the cold night air. That was it. That was the final betrayal. James looked at his son, standing there defending the maid and her child. He looked at the three of them, a strange, defiant little family, united against him. He had lost his son. The thought didn't make him sad. It made him furious. Emily, James said. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. You are fired. You and your daughter will be off this property by 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. I will have security escort you out. Mr. Anderson. God. No, please. Emily was openly crying now, her hand over her mouth. Matthew took a step forward. Dad. No. You can't. This is my fault. Punish me. Send me to the boot camp. I'll go. I'll go right now. Just don't do this to them. It is already done, James said. He looked at his son's desperate, pleading face. For the first time, Matthew was bargaining. He was offering surrender, and it only made James feel more powerful. He had found the leverage, at last. No, James said again. You will learn. You will both learn. Actions have consequences. He looked past his son and his crying maid. He looked at the girl. Sophie Hayes was not crying. She was standing perfectly still, her small, pale face a mask. She was just watching him. Her eyes were clear and steady. They were not filled with fear. They were filled with something else. It looked like pity. That look, from her, was the final insult. No example, James said. He turned and walked back toward the house, his back straight, his footsteps even on the gravel path. He left the sound of Emily's sobbing behind him. He left his son, standing alone in the darkness. He went into his office and locked the door. He sat at his obsidian desk. He felt a grim, hollow victory. He had won. He had broken the alliance. He had re-established control. He waited for the sun to rise. At dawn, James was still at his desk. He had not slept. He had been staring at the profit and loss statements on his screen, but he had not seen them. He kept seeing the girl's face. That look of pity. He heard the sound of a car engine. Not one of his. It was an old engine, rattling and weak. He stood and walked to the window. A 20-year-old sedan was parked by the service entrance. It was Emily's car. James saw his head of security, a man named Robert, standing by the open trunk. Emily and Sophie were carrying two worn-out suitcases. They were not talking. Emily looked defeated. Her face was swollen from crying. She opened the back door of the car and helped Sophie in. James watched as his son, Matthew, came running out of the house. He was wearing the same clothes as last night. Wait, wait, Matthew yelled. He ran to Emily. He was holding something. An envelope. Emily, please, Matthew said. He was out of breath. He tried to press the envelope into her hand. It's all I have. It's $2,000. It's my allowance. It's all in cash. Please, take it. Emily shook her head, pushing his hand away. I can't, Matthew. I can't. Please. It's my fault. It's all my fault. Take it. Find an apartment. No, a small voice said. Sophie got out of the car. She walked up to Matthew. She was holding a small, faded book. It was cloth-bound. This is your fault, she said. Matthew flinched, as if she had slapped him. Sophie, I'm so sorry. It's not your fault he's your father, she said. But it's your fault you didn't learn the language. What? Matthew looked confused. You learned the letters. You didn't learn the language. It's not just for help. It's for truth. She held out the book. This was my great-grandfather's. It's his journal. From the prison camp. Sophie, I can't take that, Matthew whispered. You have to, she said. Page 54. My great-grandfather. He wasn't the only one in his family who knew the code. His captain knew it, too. The captain was a young man from a rich family. He didn't have to be there, but he was. He was captured with his men. James watched from his window, a strange, cold feeling gripping his chest. The captain got sick, Sophie said, her voice clear in the morning air. He told my great-grandfather a secret, using the code. A message for his wife. But he died before he could get home. My great-grandfather, he tried to find the wife after the war. But she was gone. He said the message was a burden. A promise he couldn't keep. She pushed the book into Matthew's hands. What was the message? Matthew asked. It's on page 54, Sophie said. It's not that hard to translate. If you're not a coward. She looked up, past Matthew, past the security guard, and straight at the window of James's office. She knew he was there. She had known all along. She was looking right at him. Goodbye, Matthew, she said. She got back in the car. Emily gave Matthew one last, sad look and got into the driver's seat. The car started, sputtered, and then slowly rolled down the long driveway. Matthew just stood there, holding the book. James watched until the car was gone. He looked at his son, a lone figure on the massive, empty driveway. He was filled with a sudden, terrible feeling. A legendary war veteran. A young captain from a rich family. A secret message. He said you have to listen for the things hidden under the noise. James turned from the window. He walked to his desk. He pulled open the drawer and took out his father's Signal Corps manual. He unlocked his office door and walked out to find his son. James walked across the gravel. His footsteps were loud in the quiet morning. Matthew did not turn around until his father was only a few feet away. When he saw his father, his eyes were cold. Come to make sure I don't go with them? Matthew asked. His voice was raw. Don't worry. They wouldn't have me. Matthew, James said. He stopped. He did not know what to say. The words, I'm sorry, were foreign. They were stuck in his throat, a language he had never learned. So he held out the thin, dark blue book. The official Signal Corps manual. 1943. Matthew stared at the book. What is that? It was your grandfather's, James said, his voice quiet. William Anderson. He was a signalman. In the war. Matthew's gaze flickered from the manual to the faded journal in his own hands. He looked back at his father, his expression a mixture of confusion and deep, weary suspicion. Why are you showing me this? Matthew asked. Page 54, James said. It was not a request. It was a statement of shared purpose. The girl, Sophie, she said, a captain, a rich captain. Comprehension dawned slowly on Matthew's face. You think. I don't know what I think, James said, and it was the most honest thing he had said in years. But I intend to find out. We will use the study. He did not wait for an answer. He turned and walked back to the house. After a long moment, he heard his son's footsteps following him. The old study was just as he had left it. Dim, silent, and smelling of leather. James turned on a single green banker's lamp on his father's old desk. The rest of the room remained in shadow. James laid the signal manual on the desk. Matthew stood beside him and placed the small, cloth-bound journal next to it. Matthew's hands were shaking slightly. He opened the journal. The pages were thin, almost like onion skin. The handwriting was small, tight, and incredibly neat. He turned the pages, past sketches of their prison cell, until he reached page 54. It was dated August 1944. In the wide right-hand margin, running from the top of the page to the bottom, was a single, thin column of dots and dashes. That's it, Matthew whispered. He pointed to the top of the journal entry. It began with a name. Captain W. A. is worse today. James felt his blood run cold. He looked at the spine of his father's manual. Stamped in faded gold letters was the name, William Anderson. My grandfather, Matthew breathed. Let's read the code, James said. His voice was hoarse. They bent over the desk, their heads close. The green lamp cast a small pool of light on the two books. For the next half hour, the study was filled with the quiet murmur of their voices. Matthew, his eyes sharp, traced the faded marks. James, his mind analytical, flipped through the pages of the manual. It was a clumsy process. Is that one dot or two? James would ask. It's a dash, I think. That makes it N, Matthew would reply. At first, the letters formed a jumble of nonsense. They wrote them on a fresh pad. It's garbage, Matthew said, slumping back. It's just nonsense. She tricked us. No, James said. He was staring at the letters. His mind, so sharp with numbers, was churning. We're not just decoding. We're translating. From a dying man. He pointed to a line of marks they had written out. Look, James said. He was sick. Or in the dark. He was spelling what he heard. Protect him. Matthew's eyes widened. You're right. And this one, from the name. A cold, heavy dread settled in James's stomach. Protect who? Him? You. Grandfather, Matthew said. He was the captain. Sophie said the message was for his wife. Your mother. Protect me, James whispered. Protect me from the Anderson name. He looked at the first line they had written. He was tapping, James said, thinking aloud. He missed a letter. He mixed them up. He heard the word, but he wrote it wrong. He stared at the jumble, his mind rearranging the components. Burdens, he whispered. He meant burdens. He looked at the next cluster. And this? Regret. James wrote the words on the pad, his hand, for the first time in his life, shaking. Burdens. Regret. Protect him from the name. James slumped into his father's leather chair. It sighed under his weight. He was a boy of 17 again. He remembered his father, William. A quiet man. A sad man. A man who sat in this very study, staring at the walls. James had hated his father's sadness. He had seen it as weakness. He had promised himself he would be stronger. He would build the Anderson name into something powerful, something that could never be broken. And in doing so, he had become the very thing his father had died regretting. He had become the burden. The name. He had threatened a single mother. He had hit his own son. He had driven away the only person who had ever connected with Matthew. All to protect an idea. A name. He was trying to save me, James whispered. My father. He was a prisoner, and he was trying to save me. From this. From what I would become. He looked at his son. Matthew was not looking at him. He was looking at the wall, at a framed photograph of William Anderson. A young man in a crisp army uniform, smiling. He wasn't a captain, Matthew said quietly. I looked him up once. Your father. He was a private. Just like Sophie's great-grandfather. James looked up, confused. What? But, Sophie said. A rich captain. She lied, Matthew said. Or, she told a different story. To make you listen. Then who was the captain? James asked. I don't know, Matthew said. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe it was just two men. Two privates. In the dark. Tapping on a wall. And one of them was your father. And one of them was her great-grandfather. The truth landed. It was heavier and simpler than any story. There was no rich captain. There was just a man, John Hayes, who had kept a promise for over 60 years. He had held the secret of his friend, William Anderson. A secret he passed down, a burden, until his great-granddaughter, a 12-year-old girl, finally delivered the message. Not to the wife, but to the son and the grandson. James Anderson, the billionaire, the titan, the man who controlled everything, put his head in his hands. He did not make a sound, but his shoulders shook. He was, for the first time in his adult life, utterly and completely speechless. Matthew stood in the study, watching his father. He had never seen him cry. He had never seen him look anything but powerful and certain. Now, the man who controlled half the city's skyline looked broken. He was just a man, sitting in his dead father's chair, his face buried in his hands. Matthew did not move. He did not speak. He felt the anger that had lived in his chest for years, a hot, solid stone, finally begin to dissolve. It was replaced by a strange, quiet understanding. After a long time, James lifted his head. His eyes were red. He looked older. He looked at his son. I have to find them, he said. His voice was a rasp. And say what? Matthew asked. He was not being cruel. It was a real question. I don't know, James said. He stood up from the desk. He was unsteady. But, I have to start. He picked up the phone on his desk. But he did not call his pilot. He did not call his lawyers. He called his head of security. Robert, he said. It's James. I need you to find Emily Hayes. She's in a 20-year-old sedan. Yes. I need you to find her now. Use every resource. Traffic cameras, toll booths. Do not let her get on a bus. Do not let her check into a motel. Find her. And Robert. James paused. He looked at Matthew. When you find her, be polite. Be respectful. Tell her I am coming to see her. That's all. Call me the instant you have eyes on her. He hung up. He grabbed his car keys from the desk. Let's go, he said to Matthew. Go where? We don't know where they are. We'll drive, James said. We'll be ready when he calls. I am not sitting here. They got into the black Bentley, the same car James used for his most important meetings. But this time, James got in the driver's seat. His chauffeur was not there. Matthew sat in the passenger seat. It was the first time in as long as Matthew could remember that they had been alone in a car together, just the two of them. James pulled out of the long driveway and onto the main road. He drove, his hands tight on the wheel. The silence was heavy, but it was not angry anymore. It was a new, uncertain silence. "She's just a kid," Matthew said quietly, looking out the window. "A 12-year-old girl. She knew all that. She knew about grandfather." "She's not just a kid, Matthew," James said. "She's the great-granddaughter of a man who kept a promise for 60 years. She's extraordinary. And I treated her like a problem, a distraction." James's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "What I did to her mother. And what I did to you." He glanced at his right hand, the hand that had slapped his son. "There is no excuse for that. Ever. He couldn't say the word sorry. Not yet. But he would." "Why did you hate him?" Matthew asked. "Grandfather." James was quiet for a long moment. "I didn't hate him," he said. "I was ashamed." He was so quiet. After he came back from the war, he was just sad. He would sit in that study for hours. "I thought he was weak. I thought the Anderson name he gave me was weak. I spent my whole life trying to be the opposite. Strong, loud, in control." "He was in a prison camp for 2 years," Matthew said. "He wasn't weak, Dad. He was just done fighting. He was trying to tell me not to start," James whispered. "And I didn't listen." The car phone buzzed. James put it on speaker. "Robert, go." "Sir, we found them." The car broke down about 20 miles outside the city. They're at a roadside diner. The Red Rooster Diner, on Route 12. "Are they okay?" James asked, his voice sharp. "They look tired, sir. But they are unharmed." "I'm on my way," James said. He pressed the accelerator. The car surged forward. The Red Rooster Diner was a small, prefabricated building. Its lights were a buzzing fluorescent yellow against the gray morning. The gravel parking lot was mostly empty, save for Emily's old, steaming car and a tow truck that had just pulled up. James and Matthew got out of the Bentley. Every eye in the diner turned to watch the billionaire in his perfectly tailored suit and his son in his rumpled, expensive clothes. They stepped inside. The bell on the door jingled. The diner smelled of old coffee and frying oil. Emily and Sophie were in a booth by the window. Emily was on the diner's payphone, her back to the door, talking to someone, her voice frantic. Sophie was sitting alone at the table, a glass of water in front of her. She looked small, pale, and exhausted. Sophie looked up as the bell jingled. Her eyes met James's. She did not look surprised. She just watched him. Emily turned from the phone. When she saw James, her face drained of all color. She hung up the receiver, her hand trembling. "Mr. Anderson," she whispered. The car, we were just leaving." "Emily," James said. His voice was quiet. He walked to their booth. "Please, sit down." He and Matthew slid into the other side of the booth. The red vinyl was cracked. James looked at Emily Hayes. He looked at her 12-year-old daughter. He had come here to fix this. But he realized, sitting across from them, that he was the one who was broken. "I am sorry," he said. The words were rusty, as if he had not used them in decades. "What I did to you, it was unforgivable. I was cruel. I was wrong." Emily stared, her mouth open. She did not know what to say. "Your great-grandfather," James said, turning to Sophie. "And my father, they were friends. They were heroes. You delivered a message that I needed to hear my entire life. And I punished you for it." He reached into his jacket. Not for a checkbook. He pulled out the faded, cloth-bound journal. He slid it across the table to Sophie. "This belongs to your family," he said. It is the most valuable thing my family owns." Sophie's small hand rested on the book. "Emily," James continued, his voice thick, "I am asking you to please come back. Not as my maid." He looked at his son, then back at her. "My house is not a home. It's a building. It's empty. My son, he needs good people around him. I need good people around me." "Sir, I don't understand," Emily said. "I am establishing a foundation," James said. The words were coming to him as he spoke, but he knew they were right. "In my father's name, and in John Hayes's name, the Hayes Anderson Foundation, to help veterans' families, to fund education for their children." He looked at Emily. "I need someone to run it. Someone with integrity. Someone who understands burdens. I would like that person to be you, Emily, with a new contract, a new salary, and a new home. Not an apartment. A home, wherever you'd like." Emily was crying now, silent tears running down her cheeks. And Sophie, James said, looking at the girl. I have made a call. There is a full scholarship waiting for you at Northwood Prep, the best school in the state, if you want it. Sophie looked at her mother, who was nodding through her tears. Sophie looked at Matthew. He gave her a small, hopeful nod. Finally, Sophie looked at James. That same, steady, unnerving gaze. And Matthew? Sophie asked. What about him? Are you still sending him to boot camp? James looked at his son. He felt the last wall inside him crumble. He reached across the table and put his hand on Matthew's arm. No, James said. Matthew is staying. He has a new tutor. If she'll have him. Sophie watched him for a long beat. Then, for the first time, a small, tiny smile touched the corners of her mouth. He's a slow learner, she said. But I think he's teachable. James let out a breath he felt he had been holding for 30 years. He nodded. Robert is having your car towed. It will be repaired. Or replaced. Whichever you prefer. For now, let's go home. Weeks later, the old study looked different. The heavy curtains were pulled back. The windows were open. Sunlight streamed into the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. James Anderson stood in the doorway. He was not wearing a suit. He was in a simple sweater. On the floor, in a patch of sun, sat Matthew and Sophie. Between them was an old-fashioned Morse code practice key, which James had found in his father's desk. Matthew was tapping a slow, careful rhythm. Dot dash dot. Dot. Dot dot dash. Sophie listened, then tapped back a much faster, more complex message. Matthew laughed. That's not what I asked. I know, Sophie said. I was correcting your grammar. James watched them. He did not interrupt. He just stood in the doorway and listened to the rhythmic tapping. It was a language he finally understood. It was not a code of war. It was not a secret of billionaires. It was the sound of a connection. The sound of two people, in the light, choosing to listen to each other. The sound of not being alone. He turned and walked quietly down the hall, leaving them in peace. And that's where we'll pause the story for now. I hope it gave you a few minutes to drift away from the noise of the day. Tell me where you were as you listened. Maybe on a porch, with a cup of tea, or unwinding for the night. I read every comment. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, a like and a subscribe help more than you imagine. And if you have feedback, I'd love to hear it. Thanks for spending this time here.